regular meetings. Is there a motion to approve the August and September meeting minutes?
So moved.
Thanks, Adrian. As part of that motion, I'd just like to add an addition in terms of an edit to what I noticed on the August meeting minutes is just a misspelling of Juanita Spotted Elk's name in the roll call section. But I have a motion as part of from Adrian to approve the meeting minutes, given in addition to that amendment that I just threw on there. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Simham. I'm just going to do a voice vote on this. All in favor, please vote by saying aye.
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 All opposed say nay. Any abstentions?
Gordon abstains from the September minutes since I was not present.
Likewise, Lamont Green.
Damien as well.
Great. Thank you to the three of you. We'll note the three of you for abstentions or noted as abstained for the September meeting minutes. Otherwise, these minutes are approved. Okay, we are now into the public comment period. It is now 2:17, but we will have, I would say, 10 minutes at least scheduled for public comment. If you wish to comment and have not already typed your name and the city in the chat box, please do so now. Each individual will be given 2 minutes to comment and will be unmuted and called in the order that your names were entered into the chat. When you reach the end of your 2 minutes, we will ask you to finish your comment so that others may speak as well. I will close public comment period in about 10 minutes from now, so approximately 2:28. With that, I will look to Naomi and others in terms of walk us through those who've already signed up.
Great, thank you. We have a couple people wanting to comment. The first is Bill Curlin Hackett. So I will. Bill, you should be able to talk.
Greetings, RHA. Bill Curlin Hackett, Interfaith Task Force on Homelessness, doing outreach to vehicles in Seattle. I encourage that if you've relaxed as to the outreach to vehicle residents, please refresh your state of alert. As Seattle contracts transition to RHA, the funding for vehicle residency outreach will be woefully inadequate. One week, the council increases our current contract by 2.5 times. The next week, it pushes it back to this year's amount. To perform this vehicle residency outreach budget during 2021, we've had to beg, borrow, and volunteer. Performance outcomes desired were exceeded, even though we were wholly underfunded. I've led the contract as a volunteer, albeit a knowledgeable one, but that is not how it should be handed over to RHA. We need a clinical staff and separately even a part-time HMIS input staff, and then to sustain the pay and the hours. That 1 week when it seemed we would have 2.5 times this year's budget, we even anticipated moving to 3 outreach teams. Silly me, I guess. It is and will be in your hands. Stay on alert. Seattle may give you a sack of money saying, do this, even re-gifting to you items they failed to do in this year's budget. Take the lead from those of us doing this for the sake of those living in vehicles who make up 1/2 of the unsheltered homeless. You will need to improve what is going to be sent to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Naomi, next speaker.
Next, we have Ruby Romero.
Okay, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, awesome, thank you. So I just had a kind of a quick question about community service officers and if that was going to be something that the RHA is working with SPD on, or if there's any preliminary, I'm sorry if I haven't found it online, but if there's any preliminary like information that I could find on the community service officers. And then I was also curious as to why King County, or if you guys know anything about why the HMIS system is completely different for King County versus the rest of the state. That's all. I do have an email if I can put that in the chat. If you guys have any resources that you could send me, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ruby, for your questions there. We'll be I would defer to you on whether you feel comfortable putting your email address in the chat box. I know in our last month's meeting back in September, we had also put on, believe I'll look to support staff to put it in the chat box and announce it publicly as well. And Naomi, thanks for putting yours in there. Feel free to use that as a resource in terms of getting connected with the right staff at the KCR, at the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, to make sure that we're getting the answers to your 2 questions at today's session for a follow-up after today's meeting. But thank you for tuning in, and thank you for those thoughtful questions today.
Thank you.
Yeah, Naomi, we'll move on to our next speaker.
So we have Bruce Drager next. Bruce, you should be able to talk.
Yeah, my name is Bruce Drager, and I'm here speaking on behalf of my organization, Green Lake Homeless Advocates, and the over 400 homeless folks that I serve there at the park, as well as my friends with the Lived Experience Coalition, to tell you about my proposal to create for the homeless folks there at the camp or that are camping around the lake, a city and county supported temporary mitigation site at a remote, virtually unused location in the Woodland Park. My work with the homeless individuals at Green Lake began 3 years ago, and up until 8 months ago, I worked with what was then just about a handful of campers at the park to find them services and housing. Over the last 8 months, the park homeless population has exploded to over 400. And with tensions mounting between the neighborhood and these homeless folks, the threat of sweep is imminent. I think it's clear to all of us that sweeps don't do any good for anyone. And for the homeless, they can disastrously lead to the loss of what meager possessions they have, including the only home they know. This proposed remotely located mitigation camp will minimize impact and restore access to virtually the entire park and save the lives of those homeless folks that live there. I've sent you all copies of this proposal. At least I sent it to the info email that was provided, and I hope you guys got it. And I'd appreciate your reviewing it at your earliest convenience and directing questions and recommendations back to me at dragerbruce@gmail.com, and I will put it in the chat as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce, for your comments here today, and just see that staff had received the email that you had sent. So we'll make sure that myself and other members of the implementation board members also see that today as well. Thank you for your time. Okay, Naomi, I think we have one more speaker.
Yes.
If I see it right in the chat.
Yes. Zanita. You should be able to talk.
Hello. Can you hear me? Yeah, my name is Zanita Reed. I am speaking on behalf of the Lived Experience Coalition in regards to funding more or helping to get more funding for our safe parking lots and change the system and create more access and resources for those car dwellers and RV dwellers, you know, instead of having their homes transported away because of ticketing and, you know, not being able to pay for tickets and tabs and licensing and things. I think we should definitely be funding more to help so people can actually live in those, helping with repairs and things like that. And there's not enough funding and there's not enough help for folks like Bill Curlin Hackett. So if we can continue that funding and increase it, that would be great. We've got a lot of folks out here that really need the help that he is providing, and there's just not enough funding for it. Thank you.
At this time, there are no other public commenters.
All right. All right, and not seeing anyone else more in the chat, and thanks for those who had a chance to participate and speak today, and for the follow-up emails, as well as the comments you put in the chat for us to be able to follow up with you after today's meeting. For anyone who did not have an opportunity to provide comment and would still like to, we will leave the chat open window for the next 10 minutes. Or please feel free to include your information in the box, and we will be sure to follow up with you as well. In the meantime, we will move on with the rest of the agenda in today's meeting. And we will now hear from the King County Regional Homelessness Authority's Director of Equity and Justice with an update on the equity-based decision-making framework from Erin Bryant Thomas. Erin, we'll go through her presentation, and then we will open it up for discussion and questions. Believe that, so go with the floor is yours, Erin.
Thank you, Nate, and good afternoon to everyone. My name is Erin Bryant Thomas. I serve as the Director of Equity and Justice with King County Regional Homelessness Authority. And today I'm before you to share the King County's Regional Homelessness Authority equity-based decision-making framework. I'm going to share my screen really quickly. All right, is it showing up pretty good for everybody?
It looks great. Yeah, thank you, Erin.
Thank you, Nate. So we'll just start with, a quick overview. This presentation is pretty quick, and I just want to share that this framework is pretty extensive, right? And what I tried to do is condense it and to provide really an overview and an idea of what it is. So this first slide is just going to share what it is. So it's a decision-making structure that is designed to deconstruct the processes that perpetuate oppression and instead establish accountability to people experiencing homelessness and position customers of our homelessness service systems and programs as decision makers and power holders within these systems. The purpose of the framework was for accountable decision making and to ensure that homeless service systems, processes, and policies proactively eliminate racial inequities and advance equity. The decision-making structure is mandated by the charter of the King County Regional Homelessness Service Public Development Authority. King County Regional Homelessness Authority has a theory of change, and I just want to read it just so folks can constantly be reminded of really where we are centering. And it states, if we create a customer-centered homeless response system, then we will be able to meet needs and eliminate inequities in order to end homelessness for all. That is our theory of change. And this is a quote that grounds me. And I usually in my presentations, I try to engage everyone in the process. And so if I can, Harold, are you available to read this particular quote? No. Harold, are you available? I just love the cadence of your voice, so just was hoping I could lean on you. If not, it's all good. I'll go ahead and read it. This quote states that every system and every institution in the United States was created originally and was designed and structured legally and intentionally to serve white people exclusively. Now, I want folks to kind of, sit with that quote, and you're welcome to put in the chat. I want you to put in the chat, what are some of the systems and institutions that you are aware of that were created originally and designed and structured legally and intentionally to serve white people exclusively? What are some of those systems and institutions? All right, I see zoning, housing, schools, criminal justice, media, education, human services, government itself, finance, healthcare. Ruby says everything. Military, banking, voting. You guys are hitting it right on the head. And so I think it's important for us to really center and get clear and stay clear that we have a huge responsibility to disrupt this very thing. Thank you for your contributions. And so with this framework, we're going to lead with those that are most impacted. Communities that should be considered to be historically marginalized and disproportionately impacted by homelessness in the United States include Black and African Americans, people who identify as Latinx, Indigenous, Native American, Alaskan, Native or First Nations peoples, Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islander people, individuals with disabilities, people who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer, incarcerated and formerly incarcerated individuals, and undocumented individuals in mixed immigration status families and communities. The goal of the framework was designed to support communities in implementing the framework for an equitable COVID-19 response. And so we are still in the midst of a pandemic, one that still needs a lot of attention and will continue to need a lot of attention, even post-pandemic. And so the framework is also to ensure that as homelessness service systems, my apologies, give me 1 second. As homelessness service systems respond to COVID-19 pandemic system processes and policies, proactively eliminate racial inequalities and advance equity. So we just want to share, very high level again, that this information is pretty extensive. And I missed a slide before where I talked about history. So I would like an opportunity to go back really quick, if that's okay. Give me 1 sec. I wanted to talk about the history because I think it's important for us to, one, honor history, acknowledge history, and respect history. This framework, I would say, was built out of necessity because we have to do something different. This whole entity, and we are all of us that are here today, we're called to do something different. And so this framework was co-created by NIS, the National Innovation Services Team, in partnership with community. They surveyed people on what was working and what was not working. Folks identified and were honest and clear that systems are racist and are put in place to maintain racial inequity. And we at KCRHA, and really all of us, we need to dismantle structural racism. Our norms have been dictated by white dominant culture, and this framework will allow us to redesign and achieve racial justice. Thank you so much for allowing me to go back. I think it's also important to acknowledge too that this is not my work, that this work was, I want to give attribution to, really Mark Dones and all those that worked alongside Mark Doan, and all the community members and stakeholders that contributed their voices to this work. So just a little bit about how to use the framework. The framework is designed to be applicable to all levels of homelessness service systems, including in policy and program design, operations, budgeting, technical assistance provisions, contracting practices, and human resources processes. And so policy decision and strategy in that particular bucket, you're looking at accessibility and clarity, community engagement, data, analysis, racial equity strategies, implementation, accountability, and evaluation and communication. We also have business operations and hiring operations. It's pretty extensive. And so I hope that we're able to share, we will share the link to the actual framework for everyone to really get their eyes on it, spend some time with it, and really get to know it so that we can really live out the principles within this framework. Again, the slide talked earlier around, working in partnership with people with lived experience, but it doesn't stop there. Folks with lived experience need to have really a power component, right? There has to be shared power in this process of decision making. And a lot of times we've convened folks and asked them to be, a part of the conversation and at the table, but don't take heed to their recommendations. And so we're really striving to really shift that and really value what people bring. So what I want you all to, really walk away with, and thank you for allowing this deck to be pretty text heavy. I tried to really condense it again, but this is so much information. It's so much good information. It's hard to, condense, but the key takeaways for today's overview of the framework. I'll just read the framework is designed to ensure that King County Regional Homelessness Authority, the decision-making process are guided by clear goals, objectives, and measurable outcomes to advance racial equity and social justice. We also want to establish people with lived experience of homelessness as decision makers across the system, to support and advance people of color and historically marginalized communities within leadership in the new entity, identify who will benefit or be burdened before decisions are made, integrate anti-racist and anti-oppressive strategies and mechanisms into implementation, include mechanisms for evaluation of impact, and include mechanisms for addressing negative consequences and revisiting decisions at a regular cadence that have negative consequences or hinder efforts to advance equity. And so this particular page just links folks to, again, the framework that was developed by the National Innovation Service. It also links folks to the KCRHA theory of change, and then living the values of equity-based decision-making. So NIS was really intentional around creating something that was really easily digestible for all. And so there's a 20-minute video that I would encourage folks to listen to. I know a lot of us have a lot of things going on, and time is not always a luxury, but to be able to just plug in and listen to the framework was a great component to this document. And so take some time to listen to the 20-minute video. We'll make sure that everyone has access to this particular link. I may just also put it in the chat. But yeah, that concludes my overview. And one of the things that I just wanted to share is our strategy, our internal strategy, is to make sure that every person is trained up and really understanding this framework. This is going to be a part of our onboarding strategy. And so we're still in the process of developing a training curriculum. But before we even get to the training curriculum, we're going to have internal conversations and really just like lunch and learns, right? Getting folks together, our colleagues together to talk about what this really means, really breaking down equity, breaking down decision-making, and really understanding what it means to be in partnership and to really share power. So I look forward to engaging in those conversations with my colleagues and you as well. You all are always welcome to be a part of the conversations, and we'll keep you posted on when we have those scheduled. I want to open it up to questions. I'll just say I don't have all the answers, but I definitely would get back to you with the answers if I can't answer them today. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you for your time, and pleasure to meet you, Erin. And so amazing even to hear about what the framework and the body of work that you'll be embarking on and helping us out at the authority, and even just the 10 minutes that you had just now. There's a lot of interest in the chat, as you may see as well, from folks about wanting to try and get a copy of that PowerPoint, including a link to the video. I would love to have a copy of the PowerPoint, including that link, also posted along with our board meeting materials for today for the public to view as well. on the website later today or tomorrow, whenever possible. As you know, I would just note we'll touch on it lightly later this meeting, but more so focus it on next month's meeting about kind of revisiting, even for ourselves in terms of the implementation board members, the committee ships and leadership within our implementation board beyond Harold and I as co-chairs, too, on a lot of the key aspects of what you just spoke to and how we work and function together as board members in conjunction with staff and the authority and what we have ahead. And so curious in terms of the framework and best practices that you spoke to and mentioned of how how those should be coming together in tandem and in parallel to support one another and collectively moving forward. But with that, I'll pause and open it up to see if any other board members had comments or questions for Aaron.
Thank you. I saw Gordon's hand and then I see Michael.
Okay.
And I also want to acknowledge that Mark is on the line. And so Mark, if you want to tackle some of these questions with me, hey, good to see you. Feel free. Yes. Hi, Gordon.
Hey, Aaron, good to meet you this way and look forward to being in community, hopefully in person sometime soon. And I appreciate what you provided, and I accept the challenge to listen to the video, and I'm looking forward to learning, benefiting from the framework. I had one suggestion and one question. I'll go with the suggestion first. From a board member's perspective and being very respectful of what you all are working to create and implement, it would be probably beneficial for me, maybe for the rest of the board, to hear some sort of self-assessment, maybe 9 months or a year from now. How has it actually been working to live into this a framework that covers those areas, comprehensive areas of the regional authority? So that's a suggestion. Come back to us and let us know, do a self-assessment, and then tell us how it's going. And of course, ways in which we can model that kind of behavior ourselves. And then the question maybe for you or Mark is, if this was done by NIS and it's working or designed for us, is it also being used in other communities? That's a curiosity. It's maybe not the identical framework, but something similar. Are other communities either utilizing or exploring the framework?
Hi, everybody. For the record, Mark Jones, CEO, KCRHA, they, them pronouns. Apologies for running slightly behind. It is budget season, y'all, and the budgets do be budgeting. So the framework was initially developed, as Mr. Odom has pointed out in the chat, as part of the NIS work to support the authority when I thought I wasn't going to work here. And then was redeveloped actually, I guess it's not last summer anymore. It's 2 summers ago during the pandemic. And it was put out as part of the National COVID Response Framework by the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, the National Alliance to End Homelessness, et cetera. And so because of that, Gordon, I don't actually have specifics on how many communities. It is broadly available and in use in many communities because it was distributed as part of that technical assistance push.
Thank you, Mark. I saw Michael's hand go up and I see it went down. You still want to?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for your presentation. It was terrific, and the framework is excellent. I'd be interested in seeing, with Mark's leadership, the practical application of this framework in some particular strategies, particularly in the policy area. Budget was just mentioned, and the budget there's probably a number of areas where some of this framework applied could shift decision, say within Seattle or other municipal governments whose decisions are pending. I would love to see some practical application with regard to some of the policies that have been mentioned over and over again in these meetings, vehicle residency, for example. It was highlighted today by several speakers. And what if we took certain challenges that are persistent and followed them through from beginning to end of utilizing this framework, action, dollars, the role of the board, as a couple of measurables that, it's not for me to prioritize which areas necessarily, but I just lift that one up. I'm sure that Mark and other members can name others that could serve as examples or models for applying this in practice. So thank you.
Thank you. Harold and then Lamont.
Thank you, Aaron. And Mark, so the NIS report, quite extensive and exhaustive at times, but it's a very learning piece of work. And Mark asked me, well, what should we go there? And I said, well, page 21 through 28 is good for me, and not skip a beat. Because in that report, as Lamont will probably tell you, and the rest of lived experience, we pushed that. We pushed that with the theory of change throughout King County, and it's going. But the framework is what you, Mike, initiated by making sure the chair, one of the chairs, is always a person of lived experience, and from the Lived Experience Coalition. We see it working now with our board and how we're intentionally doing certain things. That's not done in the city, which it could be a game changer in some of the work that's done in the city. Aaron, I appreciate you all the time when I see you, and you did excellent work in the city, and you're one of my mentors. And I just think you're here and pushing this out. It's going to be a great piece of work, even better. And so just thank you.
Thank you, Harold. Lamont.
No, thank you, Aaron. Excellent presentation. And my question is around looking at the equity-based decision-making framework. And I see that Paula also mentioned in the chat that they've been using this on the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance board. And so with regards to the governance board, the implementation board, and the COC advisory board, is there a model or a framework or a cheat sheet or something that we could use as these various boards are making very important decisions?
That's a really great question, Lamont, and it calls to mind for me a question of procedural. I don't think I can make you. The authority has to use it, right? And so, as the board of the authority, theoretically, you should also have to use it, or maybe you don't have to, because I can't make you do anything. So actually, I'm not sure. I think, if you all want to adopt it, then we can certainly, Lamont, to your point, put together a cheat sheet or a way, right, that sort of structures how you all can walk through using it without having to, as Harold has demonstrated repeatedly, have it thumbed and at the ready. So I think for me, it's I think that would make sense. I just think you might all have to tell yourselves you're going to do it.
Oh, thank you, Mark. That's helpful, because I wasn't sure in the language of the ILA that meant we all had to use this, from governance to implementation to COC.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if it's helpful, we can also ask council, right? And see if they think that the ILA language would also bind the IB and the governing committee or not. Would that be helpful to get that answer from council and then come back and see whether or not there's actually a need for a vote?
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Dr. Reedy.
Hey, thank you, Aaron, Simha. Thank you for that great presentation. I like the idea of bringing the racial equity framework into, the equity-based decision-making framework into how we do our work on the board. Whether or not it's already something we're required to do, I think we could probably benefit from some training on how to do it, right? I think there's some general guidelines that we are hopefully following, trying to avoid jargon, trying to talk about our assumptions, but I don't really know how to implement such a framework and would love to learn more.
Thank you for that. I think that is a great offering. And I definitely see us, really building this out so that we all can use it. I mean, it's good to go, that official route around, getting it voted upon, but I think if we become really strong and practice in this framework, the people we serve will be better off.
Yeah, I echo Simha's points there. That was kind of what I was partly getting to it earlier in regards to, while we have the structures in place in terms of our committees and our leadership as a board, also, as you mentioned, Aaron, and the close of your presentation, training and orientations for KCRHA staff. I think, we'd be open to exploring it for our board, as ourselves as board members, in terms of recognizing the role that we play in all of this as well. So yeah, thank you. Any other questions or comments for Aaron and Mark? Okay, seeing none. Thank you so much for your time, Aaron. Wonderful presentation. Great to hear about all the great work and looking forward to learning and working with you more. All right, Mark, now that you are here, welcome. We will hear from you. We'll look to you now for your CEO report today.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with you all today. My biggest updates are in the internal ops and in the budget portions. I'll start with internal ops. So we have hired 23 people across all divisions, and we are 73% folks of color. We have, which I just like in terms of operating inside equity and seeking out working with marginalized communities and bringing folks in house. That is dope. That's just very dope. So want to lift that up. We have initiated sort of the launch codes on our system stand-up work with providers. Yesterday, we had our provider notification webinar where I will also say, increasingly, my role in a lot of these things is it's so small and I just love it. I showed up to that provider meeting. I said, hello, we are so pleased to work with you. And then Peter Lynn did all the work. And so that was fantastic. But Peter and Peter's team have really been doing a tremendous amount of work, cannot be overstated, to stand up the grants management system. And it's again, brand new. It is not what the county uses or the city uses, and to ensure that our staff are trained on it and able to use it. And then also that providers are getting the information that they need. So Peter yesterday gave them the run through of what that contracting process is going to look like between now and January in order to migrate the bodies of work that they are doing that are held by either the city of Seattle or King County over to us, and ensure that they have an active contract to invoice against starting January 1. In doing so, I also, again, want to give a nod to Peter and that team. They're working really hard to modernize how we do it. And I think, I'm deeply appreciative of that stance. And I think what I'm hearing from providers and from the community is that they're also appreciative, right? That that some of the things that have been technical difficulties for them for quite some time, we have this opportunity to address and are trying to do so. We are also, thanks to the tireless work of Meg Barclay, who is our Chief Administrative Officer, are on track to have our internal fiscal controls fully implemented by December 1, which again, so good. such a good thing that will be fully done. Meg, I also would be remiss if I did not lift up Meg in her role as CAO, is the woman of many hats, and she wears them all with a lot of grace. She is negotiating contracts with, facilities and with vendors, and then, diving into hotel leases, and then, editing the final employee handbook, and then implementing the general ledger, so like all, sort of at the same time. And so really want to lift up Meg and her team for the work that they have done. Both Peter and Meg are shepherding really critical, system stuff, right? That without which we could not be operant. And they are doing a tremendous job at the same time that they're hiring people and making everything else happen. We are also have officially convened 3 working groups on core policy areas that we see gaps in the system. I've mentioned these before, but they are fully up and running. So one is on high acuity needs. So that's folks who may have a significant behavioral health issue, a significant substance use issue, a significant co-occurring disorder, and are also experiencing some form of homelessness. There's nothing, we don't have things for those folks, right? It's very bad. And so, and what we feel clear about on our team is that if you are experiencing homelessness, even if ultimately the care that you need lives in the behavioral health system, we have a responsibility to, right? And so we're in the process of really beginning to wrap our arms around what that responsibility looks like, how to really implement it at the program level. We are in conversation also with the county and Leah Floor and Kelly Mora to have the conversation about making sure that our lanes are clear and that we are not trying to replicate the behavioral health system in the homelessness system or vice versa, right? So really happy to have those collaborative relationships and to be able to do that work. We've also convened a working group on outreach, which is frankly wrestling with the existential question at this point of like, what is outreach? There are a lot of different ways to do it. And not a whole lot of codified, like, this is the thing, right? Part of it has to do with like, the literal operational question of outreach to what with scarce resources, right? Like outreach workers often don't have a thing to refer someone into. But then there's also this question of just model, right? Is it an advocacy model? Is it a supportive model? Is it, an assertive community treatment model, right? Like there are ways to do outreach. And we have not necessarily, as a community, really said, this is the model or the set of models, right, that we really want to put an investment in and see a result from. I want to lift up, right, that this is not the authority saying nobody knows what outreach is, and so you don't know what outreach is. This is like, we convened the outreach folks and said, what are we wrestling with today, right? And like everyone was sort of like, we need to figure out what this is, right? And I think it is indicative of, frankly, a hunger that the community has to solve some of these big questions, and really have been waiting for the authority to be that central convener, to hold that space, to have the conversation, and then to say, okay, we had it, we're validating it as this is the outcome of the conversation, and we're going to put it into practice and see how it goes. So really trying to live into the work there around ensuring that the authority is not just sort of driving things, but is pulling people in, asking the questions, convening the conversation, and then implementing in that way. Our last working group is focused on vehicular residency. So it's folks who live in vehicles, right, and are experiencing homelessness. Not a monolith at all, and historically underserved in the system. And so we need to begin to have a conversation about what serving folks who are experiencing vehicular homelessness, what that looks like, what kinds of new programs we might develop, et cetera. That group, their first meeting is on Monday. The other 2 groups have had their first meetings already. On all groups, we incorporated folks with lived experience, and folks have decided how they want to show up, if they want to say like, hey, I'm a person with lived experience, or they just want to like be part of the conversation, but wanted to be clear that those voices were conscientiously included. The only other two big updates that I have are on the emergency housing vouchers. So we are at pace for our referrals. Again, Peter and his team have really led that work. I think that it has been the referral rates are looking pretty solid. So that's the referrals of people who are eligible for a voucher from us as the COC to the housing authorities who then administer the vouchers, right? So we refer, then the authorities administer. The challenge, that I would be remiss not to lift up so that, if any of our colleagues who are here from the media want to write about it, is the lease up timeframe from the federal government is aggressive and perhaps unrealistic for large markets like ours, right? That are very, very, very competitive. And so while the referral rates are looking good, the lease up rates are tough. And it really is just, about the nature of the housing market here, which is why we are all here to begin with, right? The last thing that I'll just say is that because of the current budget proposal from City of Seattle, which I don't know if it'll be the final, but at least in what came out yesterday, the authority no longer has any operating deficit. So all of our admin deficits were cured by council action. And so that is obviously quite good. It's nice to be able to know that we will be able to staff and have those staff in perpetuity. So I think that's it from me in terms of updates. Any questions or comments from y'all before we move to the next agenda item?
Harold, is your hand raised from the last section, or do you have your hand raised from Mark?
My fault.
All good. Lamont?
Thank you, Mark, for that report. And just two questions regarding the emergency housing vouchers. Is there a dashboard, and are we disaggregating any of that data by various demographics to see who's getting those vouchers? And then the second piece, I'm really curious about the public housing authority's role. Sometimes they have stricter requirements regarding criminal legal background than HUD has. And so, which often is a problem, with people with criminal legal histories and creating this kind of extra added barrier to housing for folks. And so, how is our local housing authorities doing with some of those things in regards to the emergency housing vouchers and getting people housed?
So there is a HUD dashboard already that we can drop the link into the chat that you can access. We are building a local dashboard. It is not up yet, but is underway. The housing authorities, to my understanding, have turned away only one, this is the second part of your question, have turned away only one referral out of 600 thus far. And so I don't believe, that they are not in good partnership with us. To the broad question of how we are targeting the vouchers, the vouchers themselves are being targeted through a framework that was refined out of our COVID prioritization work, which explicitly targeted historically marginalized communities and folks experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And so because of that, the just initial track of how we said we were going to use the vouchers was with a focus on historically marginalized communities. And that was baked into the MOUs that were signed with the housing authorities, and then baked into the way that the vouchers were allocated for distribution from their various points. And so that's the foundation. To the point around disaggregation, we internally disaggregate and review that way. And then publicly, again, that'll be available when we launch our local dashboard.
Thank you, Mark. And then just really quickly, do the EHV vouchers allow for paying 20% over fair market rent values? And has that been incentivizing landlords at all?
So the emergency housing vouchers or EHVs do go to a 120% FMR or fair market rate cap. So that, I mean, like that is the maximum that they can pay out. This is a longer conversation, but the issue of whether or not that incentivizes landlords when, right, like they are able to sometimes get more than 120 FMR, right, from someone coming in off the sort of private market, right? I mean, that's just the reality of where we live, right? Which is that folks are able to command a lot of money by just listing it on Zillow and saying, like this is how much it costs. And so that in and of itself does not necessarily serve as the incentive that it might in some other jurisdictions. The other thing that I would say is that because of, we are grateful, frankly, for having strong partners in Seattle Housing Authority and King County Housing Authority and the Housing Connector, right? So we've got 2 move to work housing authorities and then the Housing Connector, all doing really strong work around landlord engagement and, retention. But that's just hard work, right? And because the emergency housing vouchers don't come with services, we've had to do some work on our end, right, on the back end of the authority to braid dollars to attach services to the emergency housing vouchers so that folks are able to have the support they need and stabilize. And, a lot of landlords, I think, as you well know, Lamont, are concerned when they see a voucher and no services because they're worried about, what might happen, et cetera, et cetera. And I want to be clear for the viewing public, much of that is myth. But there are cases where something happens. And in those cases, when something happens, when there is not a service attached, right, it damages the trust and makes it difficult to lease up again. And so, one of the things that is currently under deliberation with City Council is adding more money to the pot for us to extend and in some cases deepen service attachments to some of the emergency housing vouchers so that we can manage and mitigate some of that. I'll also just say, and I think, this is consistent with some of what the LEC position has been, although Lamont, you can correct me if I'm wrong, which is like when we do things like rapid rehousing, et cetera, and offer no housing stabilization support, it often doesn't work great, right? So I think the emergency housing vouchers as a resource are really great. I think that my communication to the HUD team in DC has been, there was a little bit of, frankly, a mistiming of releasing a ton of American Rescue Act plan dollars or American Rescue Plan Act, dollars, and not letting people know that these emergency housing vouchers were on the way, months later, because people spent the Rescue Act dollars, right? And then when the housing vouchers dropped, there was no one had the resources ready to go to attach the right kind of service and housing navigation infrastructure to them. So it's just been a little bit of a, and love our federal partners, love this resource, but it has been a difficult rollout. And so that I is my meandering way of just sort of trying to answer your question, but also give you all of the background on how it has rolled out and where our difficulties are. was that helpful?
No, that's really helpful. And that's why I asked the question about how the rules regarding our local public housing authorities, because nationally they've been finding a lot, like sometimes the housing authorities have even more strict requirements than HUD, especially around criminal backgrounds. And that's been creating a lot of barriers nationally. So that's why I was curious in our local context.
So I don't think we've seen anything aggressive around criminal background. I think that the documentation, that, you know, the other concern in other communities has been housing authority documentation requirements. And in that space, our housing authorities have also, I think, instituted some pretty good practices. They both have, I think, over 120-day grace period for people to supply the documentation after they've been issued the voucher. So we, as part of COVID prioritization work, we don't really require any documentation. That was one of the great things that the waivers allowed us to do, which is step away from that work that we know often creates equity issues. And the housing authorities have sort of been able to step in that direction by having these very lengthy grace periods that allow people time to stabilize and pull together that documentation.
Thank you, Mark.
No problem. Always room for improvement though, right? I just like, that's the nature of the game. We can always be doing better to serve people. So I want to be clear again for viewing public. This should not be seen as like, you know, slam dunk, huge win. We can, there's still more to do. We're doing good, but we can do more.
Thanks. Any other questions or comments for Mark? Here, let's see who. Gordon, go ahead.
Great. Just a comment, actually. I really appreciate this last conversation that Mark began to lift up, and then Lamont asked some good questions. For me, you know, it's important to hear that these parts of our system are working well in a way that with intentionality toward those who are in need of those resources. And we're in a crisis, and we have this special funds and waiver, but there is a cyclicality to how the federal government does their work. And so I think it would be helpful, at least for me and perhaps for this board, to understand as we hopefully move out of crisis, you know, are there opportunities to communicate to our federal partners, here's some things you can do in a non-crisis situation that supports the work of the regional authorities, supports the work of housing authorities, and most importantly, is supportive of those who are in housing or in need of housing. So I just know that there's so much going on. I appreciate Mark and the team who are, and our housing authorities who are closer than I and my team are to it, and want to know of opportunities to advocate for better policy or to change the system, leveraging the experiences, both good and perhaps negative, that we've encountered over the past year and a half, and to keep the pressure on to do more. So it's just a comment, and just saying, I think we have to, at least for us, we need to follow your leadership, and we're happy to do so, ready to do so.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Gordon. Anyone else?
Just one thing, and then I'll shut up. I feel like I've been talking too much.
You're okay, Lamont, go ahead.
But with the Landlord Risk Mitigation Fund, okay, we don't have one yet. So in Florida, they've been having some problems too. I forgot what community it was. And they did the Landlord Risk Mitigation Fund. It helped to really incentivize landlords more. And no one even used the fund. So it just provided a sense of insurance and ease for landlords. So I think in this very competitive market, I think that we are going to have to be very creative and innovative in thinking about how to incentivize landlords. And I think that that's something that we've seen nationally that works well.
Thanks, Lamont.
Mark, in regards to even our next month's meeting and thinking about the budget timeline for ourselves, as well as our county and city partners too, we'll just look to getting an update from you and staff well, we had a chance in our September meeting to talk about budget priorities and the way that we best understood it in late September, if I remember right. It seems like an eternity ago already, but sometime in our December meeting, I think it's December 10th, if I'm thinking that the exact 10th or 12th, maybe, whatever the second Wednesday is next month. We'll just get an update from you and staff, I assume, for the board's awareness of where we are getting into the turn of the year in regards to budget.
Yeah, yes.
In some whatever form it happens to be by then.
I don't want to, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, if this is the wrong approach. I'm happy to put something together sooner. I don't want to waste your time with something that changes a bunch, and I'm not clear based on some of the conversation that's happening right now, and sort of what walk-on amendments I think are likely. What shape the budget, the city of Seattle budget will be in a week. And so, I think the reason why I reported out on the admin is that I think that is not likely to shift. There are a number of other things that were in the balancing package released by Budget Chair Mosqueda that I think are likely to shift. And so I'm happy to read you into those things. But I was thinking I'll read you in on the things that feel stable. But of course, I'm not trying to hide information from any of you. So if you want more information, please feel free to either say so right now and we can talk about it, or I'm happy to brief anyone one-on-one or in a group.
At least from speaking for myself, not looking for or expecting a whole PowerPoint presentation follow-up on December 8th and looking it up myself by then, knowing that things could still be in flux by then. But even in terms of just a verbal update like you just did now in your CEO report would be good, just in terms of for folks' awareness as we continue on in the weeks ahead of what we have going on with the city. But yeah, thank you for that. Gordon, do you still have that question you wanted to ask before we move on? No, you're okay? Okay. All right, let's move on to the next item of the agenda, which will go over now a couple of key policy needs that we need to address as a board. First, Mark and their team will now provide an overview of the changes made to a few of the authority policies we saw back in June and July. Then we'll have a discussion about the implementation board structure, including the upcoming co-chair transition and the subcommittees we discussed back in May. Mark, I'll just pitch it over to you first.
Thank you. So we've got a couple policies that we wanted to bring back for vote. And Peter and Meg, feel free to hop in here at any point in time. But we changed some of our financial policies to reflect our staffing structure. So like literally change things like, from CFO to finance director, right? Like those kinds of line edits. And so those kinds of things were changed in the financial policies, particularly governance and internal controls, and then financial policies around treasury and investments. We also modified our procurement policy to include more robust language referencing the equity-based decision-making framework, and particularly philanthropic investments, which there was some concern raised frankly, at the meeting, actually. I remember when we were having this conversation about this policy, that this was going to allow for, essentially like special interest direction of funding by the philanthropic community or others, right, in ways that were not in line with the equity-based decision-making framework or the way that the authority is supposed to be structured. And so what we have done is revise that language to bring it more in line. Where that has the most impact is mostly in how then procurement flows out of funding that comes to us, right? So the previous language allowed for a funder to say, well, my interest is really in X, right? So, I'm going to give you money, but I want to make sure that it's only spent on, Y. And the concern was that like maybe that is the right thing to do, but if it was solely funder driven, then there was no community input, right? There was no equity based decision making around like, is that the right thing to spend money on? So we have edited that language to ensure, right, that when we receive funding, that we are not, serving as a essentially, a vehicle for interests that are not the communities and in line with like where we need to be going. I don't anticipate that will cause any significant heartburn with any of you all. Again, I will lift up that this was a concern that was raised in the meeting when we were talking about this policy. And so we are catching up.
That's helpful. Yeah, a little refresher from where we were back in our summer monthly discussions on this. Thanks, Mark, for that. Any questions from fellow board members? Adrian? You're muted, Adrian.
Thank you. Mark, I think you answered this question last time, but have the fiscal policy, have these policies been reviewed by legal counsel?
Yes.
Very complicated. Thank you.
Yeah. They are generated by the accounting firm that we retain. Then they're reviewed by Peter, Meg, Helen, myself, and then are reviewed by counsel.
Great, thank you. And just a quick comment, they look great. I noticed one of them had some gendered language in it, and it would be great if that's a minor edit to not refer to our CEO as he.
Yeah, I would like
Thanks.
that too.
Thanks, Adrian. Lamont?
In the documents, will there be hyperlinks to the equity-based decision framework and other things?
In the policy documents?
Yes. I guess I'm always concerned that, when people have moved on and these documents are here and things kind of fade, that there would be an easy, accessible way for people when they pull up the documents to be able, to go to the hyperlink.
We can do that. I also think, we have a, particularly for things like the equity-based decision-making framework and all of the different activities that it governs, right? Like, we have like a whole Google Drive that is indexed and like has all of the different, there's like, here's the fiscal policies folder, et cetera, et cetera. And so anyone who comes after us will gain access to all of that growing institutional knowledge that is already pretty well organized. But we can put in hyperlinks too. It's not a big deal.
Thanks, Lamont. Any other questions, comments, suggested edits? If seeing none, to Mark's point, this should be I think a voice vote, not a voice vote, a roll call vote for this one. So I'll entertain a motion given the to adopt these two policies as presented with the two amending factors that were noted by Adrian and Lamont.
So moved, Gordon.
Thank you, Gordon. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
Thank you, Adrian, for the second. Any discussion? Just say thanks to Mark and team and working with council and others to bring this back to the board and moving us forward. All right, we'll do a roll call vote. Naomi, can you walk us through? And I believe as you do so, we'll still have Lamont be the delegate for Juanita Spotted Elk in regards to this vote, this roll call vote.
Pastor Carrie Anderson.
Trying to get this thing off of mute. Yes.
Nate Caminos.
Yes.
Paula Carvalho.
Yes.
John Chalmanak.
Yes.
Gordon McHenry.
Yes.
Harold Odom.
Yes.
Damian Patnaugh.
Aye.
Adrian Quinn.
Yes.
Michael Ramos.
Yes.
Sarah Rankin. Simha Reddy. Lamont Green.
Yes.
I believe the motion passes. Naomi, thank you for that. And thank you to Mark and team. Okay. So I will point it back to me for the rest of this discussion. So board members, a few things. One is as you received a message a month or so ago from me, I'm unable to continue committing to be a co-chair as we get into 2022. I actually looked at the date. It's exactly today, 365 days ago, last year, that you voted to have Harold and I as your co-chairs. We didn't set any term limits, but you definitely entrusted the both of us in leading you through. And what a year it has been. I did want to make sure, in talking to Harold and Mark and other members of the KCRHA support staff, in utilizing part of this opportunity before we get into January on just the overall structure of our board itself. And I hate to be a bit of an annoyance in this in some sense, because we've talked about the structure of our board 3 or 4 different meetings. The most recent time we did so is the May meeting, in which we actually discussed some other key positions in terms of officer positions, as well as subcommittees. And at that time, in that May meeting, we actually voted unanimously in passing a subcommittee cohort to move forward with a structure. But as far as I understand, we actually even haven't assigned or met in some of those subcommittees in that light. A couple of those things that I see as potential missed opportunities, but could be helpful now, obviously, at this time, now that we are in a far different place, obviously, in May than we are today, 6 months later. As we look into 2022, are things like the budget committee was discussed in that May meeting, even thinking about the fiscal audit reviews, budget development, procurement process and development and review, even things that just Gordon and Adrian and Lamont were just talking about during the CEO report about how we're transitioning and how we're developing our 2022 budget in the coordination with the city, and how the equity-based decision-making framework is a part of that discussion for ourselves as a board, in coordination with the new staff that are part of our authority. That KCRHA work plan and performance committee also included theory of change development, equitable hiring, some of the things that we heard from Erin earlier this afternoon to talk about the role and position that she's now empowered to do in moving us forward in the authority. Aspects that we talked about as a board, even jointly with the governing committee last summer when we were founded and established in a joint session that we had with the governing committee about seeking additional training for ourselves, and the role that we would in turn play in the leadership positions that we're in as a board moving forward. The budget committee, obviously, I spoke on before, and of course the strategic communications, the intergovernmental cooperation, the sub-regional planning committee, or the systems planning committee, and the work that Alexis has now briefed us twice in terms of all the work and outreach that has been going on across the county with multiple stakeholders and organizations on the ground, even throughout this pandemic, to really get an assessment and to hear directly from key folks about what they're seeing and how the authority can be helpful. While now Mark has certainly been able to be supported by a lot of staff under them in this way, we don't want to create too many overlaps, as we talked about back in May, and being conscious about that. But certainly, while we look to Mark and the staff leadership for what they feel they need, in essence, we need to decide as an implementation board what we need to drive and direct staff to do. And a lot of that is just us having a little bit more of a discussion amongst ourselves about what type of direction and what type of resources we're willing to commit for ourselves and where we would like staff to be assigning those resources. And part of that includes where we would like to place them in terms of the committee structure that we would like to be a part of and integrating with this growing staff team too in that respect. And so in that light, I just wanted to flag that we don't need to get into it too deep for the purposes of this meeting and the limited time that we have today. But I did want to make sure that Harold and I brought this back to you once more, and noting that we do intend to dedicate time in the December meeting to bring this back up so that we're not talking about the structure of the committee so much as needing to really make decisions on actual assignments of these committees. And if we're really going to be actually making these meetings happen, that we do so and we do start moving forward and making these commitments and coordination happen with staff beyond these monthly meetings that we have together when we see each other once a month in a more formal manner. So with that, I will pause if there's any other comments, questions, or input, but I just wanted to also make time in encouraging folks that while I'll be stepping down as a co-chair, and next month's meeting will be my last time with the virtual gavel with Harold in that respect. Excited about the opportunity of seeing other folks on this board also lifted up to be a part of this role and working alongside Harold in that way. And also if there's others who are interested in that treasurer or secretary roles as well, as we last left off in May, as we kind of build a little bit more of a deeper bench in our executive committee as a board getting into 2022. Simha? Yeah, you're muted, Simha.
Well, I definitely said something really brilliant while I was on mute. Sure. But Nate, mostly I just wanted to really thank you. I mean, I think your leadership has been incredibly important over this last year, and really grateful for the work you've done. Did have one other sort of question. You sort of talked about the committees that we have. Our job is to both provide oversight and provide support to the RHA. I guess of those committees that you talked about, sort of the standing committees, which ones, I guess this is more directed to Mark and the RHA team, which ones do you think are still important at this stage, 6 months later? Which ones are needed by the RHA?
Do you want me to answer that, Chair?
Yeah, I mean, I have an answer to it too, but since I spoke for like 10 minutes straight real quick, I'll let you speak first and I'll follow you, Mark.
All of them was my answer. So from my perspective, I think it's two things, right? Like there is both the support, but there is also, I think oftentimes people are like, how do you deal with having so many bosses? And I'm like, it's actually fine. Like people are super chill. Like you all are oversight. Like we have to have oversight in these key domains. And when we don't, it's an organizational weakness, right? Like, and so it's less about, from my perspective, it's less about like, needing the hand-holding on it. Like we've got great people doing great work. It's literally satisfying the legal requirements around oversight of core functions and ensuring that to Lamont's point about like, we won't always be here. Like later on, somebody might come do some fraud, Like, and that is the purpose of oversight, is to make sure that that stuff cannot happen. And so I want to make sure that like we are building that strong oversight structure from jump, and that we're not exposing ourselves to organizational weakness or liability because this group has high trust, right? The other thing that I would just lift up is like some of the other things, like the System Performance Committee, for example, right? That you might all determine that that's actually a committee of the whole, right? That you all, but it might be a different chair, right? Like maybe, you know, John chairs System Performance or Adrian chairs System Performance, you know, something like that, right? But the purpose of those conversations is oriented very explicitly around system architecture. What are we designing? Why are we designing it? And that becomes the place where we get to like do the thoughtful work, frankly, that's not about oversight, but is about like, what are we doing and why are we doing those things? And are they successful? And how do we know that they're successful, right? Like that might be where we have the conversation about finalizing the metrics that the authority has to like promulgate, right? So it's those kinds of things that from my perspective, I would lift up and then say, so all of those things are necessary. Now, do they all need to meet every month? No, probably not, right? But like what I think we need from you all is at least some indication of at least who's going to chair those things, so that we can begin to collaborate with those chairs around supporting whatever the structure is going to be, right? But right now we're, I don't want to be dramatic. We're not in an impasse. That feels dramatic, but like we are unable to support anything because we don't know who to support.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, for that. To just also answer your question, Simha, for you and other members of the board as well. The awkward thing of like having to watch our May meeting and what we were discussing and what we were forecasting even 3-6 months out from that May meeting when we passed this this committee framework as well as the exact framework of it at the time. I had mentioned we won't know what we won't know, but we'll have a chance to refine it 3 to 6 months down the road. We lost that opportunity in the last 6 months to be able to have that refinement. But in the meantime, Mark obviously and staff have moved forward on launching things like the 3 working groups that they discussed earlier in the CEO report. That body of work continues. But the oversight factor that Mark spoke to is key in the way that we all have obvious value in the work that we brought to the table as implementation board members, and to be able to be a part of that discussion. So how do these subcommittees essentially also help guide and provide oversight and what's going on in the working groups a little bit more instinct in that manner? I will say it is, while and I appreciate all the kind words in the chat too, and all the comments that have been shared by my fellow board members, it is sad and hard to step away from this role, and as challenging as it was, and not knowing what it was going to be in the last 365 days, it is very fulfilling. But I would say it would be hard to foresee it to be sustainable, to be honest, and the amount of weight that is carried up on the shoulders of Harold and I purely as co-chairs, to be honest and frank with y'all in that regard. And so, yeah, I would, even for me, just to be somewhat selfish in this capacity, if you look at the May document for the viewing public, you can find the document I keep verbally referring to in the May 12th implementation board meeting. The co-chair responsibilities you can have is just CEO performance for Mark, right? And the way that we were talking about when we hired Mark earlier this year of doing at the end of this year. And so the work plan performance committee could certainly be a part of that product, and the way that we would be involved in that is too. So there's a lot of things that now we're getting moving and getting work, and where these committees can certainly be that formal body of work rather than staff really just consulting primarily Harold and I of ourselves, or who do we go to amongst the board in an informal manner. Any other questions, comments? Again, these types of things, even this, what we wrote and voted on 6 months ago, we can refine and discuss further as we get to the next month's meeting, but just wanted to raise this as a point of discussion, trying to plant this in your minds as we look into the 3 or 4 weeks out for the December 8th meeting, in which I will look to you all now to make decisive action on, and to please think and consider about where you might see yourself being a committee member in one of these groups. Okay. Unless there's anything else, I'll turn it back over to Mark for the motion on deferral of annual requirements. Okay, so
Hello.
go ahead, Mark.
Oh, okay. I, speaking of oversight, I need permission not to do a bunch of stuff. So the ILA makes reference to a number of annual requirements, and the, as you know from your monthly touch points with us, like we're not in a state from a startup perspective to satisfy these requirements. And they would be onerous in the extreme to even attempt. The results would be weird. And I think that they would damage the staff capacity, right, to be able to do the work that they need to do, right, in order to finish system stand up by diverting those critical resources to writing reports, essentially, right? We are in the space where we are going to begin to develop a 5-year plan in alignment with the regional action plan, et cetera. But the ILA says that by the end of the year, we need to file an operating budget that is consistent with the 5-year plan or its successor, but the 5-year plan doesn't exist yet, right? And the budget is just the FY22 budget that is consolidated out of city and county, right? So it is not what I believe, frankly, the ILA contemplates, which is like a truly proposed operating budget, right? Where I bring to you, hey, here are the priorities that we've identified because of the work that we've done. And let's talk about it together. And it came through the system performance committee. And like that is not the work that we have done together. And so to divert our resources into doing that kind of reporting, I think would be, again, it would be a weird document. It would be, I think, disingenuous at best, and a poor use of resources. The other things that it asks for are an annual funding allocation report. But we're not really able to do that, right? Because I've only worked here for 6 months, and we have only had access to startup funds, right? That were pre-allocated by the city and the county and have been spent on the things that they were supposed to be spent on, right? Adopting an annual work plan, which includes a summary of projects and activities to be undertaken during the budget period. Again, like that to me does not feel like a thing that we could actually put forward, because we have not done the system redesign work that's going to inform the RFP that, again, should come through a system performance subcommittee. There's a requirement for an annual work plan that identifies sub-regional goals and activities that are, again, in alignment with the 5-year plan, but the sub-regional planning is happening right now. So like we can't, like, it's just a whole bunch of stuff that is clearly good stuff to do, but is not contemplated in the ILA as having a relationship to a startup period of any kind. And so as a result, I think that from our perspective, it doesn't make sense, but need permission not to do it.
Thanks, Mark. I understand. Any questions? Damien?
Just to clarify, Mark, the request for our consideration, are you requesting that you don't do it at all this year and defer it to a later date, or you're just saying you would do this the next calendar year?
We would do it in 22, right? Yeah. So we would file all these reports at the end of 22, in conjunction with all the other things we have to file in 22, like the actual 5-year plan and the sub-regional plan. Like all those things have to be done next year. And so then we could file the reports that are in relationship to them in a way that like makes sense. But there is no 5-year plan to refer to. So most of these things would have like big voids of logic of like, what are we referring to and why are we doing it, you know?
Okay. I think this is a roll call vote on this one, just to make sure we're providing extra secure measures for Mark on this request. And so we'll entertain a motion to defer annual reporting requirements set forth by the ILA until the end of 2022. Is that correctly stated? Okay.
Second.
I have a motion from Lamont and it sounds like a second from Damien. Is that correct? Okay. All right.
Yes.
Thank you both. Any further discussion on this? Seeing none, we will go through a roll call vote. Naomi, can you walk us through that?
Pastor Carrie Anderson,
Yay.
Nate Caminos,
Yes.
Paula Carvalho,
Yes.
John Chamanak,
Yes.
Gordon McHenry,
Yes.
Harold Odom, Harold Odom, Damian Patnaw,
Aye.
Adrian Quinn,
Yes.
Michael Ramos,
Yes.
Sarah Rankin, Simha Reddy,
Yes.
Lamont Green.
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays, and 2 absentee. The motion passes.
Thank you, Naomi. Thank you, Mark. All right. Well, we are 13 minutes early, despite starting a little late at a time. Just want to thank you all for a great meeting. Our next regular meeting and will be our last implementation board meeting of the year. Will be taking place Wednesday, December 8th from 2 to 4 p.m. With that, I will call this meeting to a close at 3:48 p.m. Thanks all. Have a great rest of your day and evening, and I'll see you then. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.